The worship space you're sitting in, to the best of my memory, is about 85 feet in any direction in the octagon. I bring people in here. They are always drawn to the kind of the high soaring ceiling, the nice intimate feel in a large space. But what they do say is it's a large space. Think of this space and compare it to the size of the lobby classroom. Okay, the lobby classroom is nice, wonderful chairs there. Looks kind of similar to what you're sitting in, but it's a nice room with nice light. It's about, 16 by 20, 15 by 20. Would you say it's fair to say that's tiny compared to this space? Keep that image in mind. If you go to Nazareth in Israel, if you're standing off in the distance looking out at the town, you can see a mammoth basilica called the Basilica of the Annunciation. It's dedicated to Mary. And a couple hundred yards from it is a teeny church called the Church of St. Joseph. Throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history, Mary has overshadowed Joseph. People have focused in on Mary and in some ways neglected Joseph. Neglected him. The birth of Jesus we tell every single Christmas story, every Christmas Eve, but we read from Luke. We know it well: a manger, shepherds, an angelic host, traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. I remember watching Peanuts. Charlie Brown says, "Does anybody know what Christmas is all about?" And Linus stands up on stage and tells the story from Luke, where Mary is the dominant person. So this morning, let's just take a little look at Joseph, because he's often ignored. And to know he actually never really speaks in the New Testament, but we can pick up enough clues along the way about him that we can learn some things from his story. First century marriage was not like it is today. There wasn't a process of dating or searching for a future loved one. There wasn't about testing out if someone's a good fit, seeing if there's a love connection, seeing if there's romance. First century marriage was arranged by your extended family. You might have no clue who this person was that they're fixing you up with. Marriage was essentially the linking of two extended families, not just two individuals, two extended families linking their honor and their status together. So really, ultimately what you would be searching for is a family of equal status in society, and your elders would make that sort of arrangements. So the father of a prospective groom would show up in the house of a young female, and he would offer her father some gifts, tangible gifts, and sort of challenge, will you receive these gifts for the gift of your daughter? And if the father was so moved and thought it was a good arrangement, he would accept those gifts and say, I promise to give you my daughter. Some sort of ceremony would occur at that point in the woman's family home, and then there would be a set apart time. Often it was up to a year, but it was an in-between time that was established after this ceremony. But after a year, she would move into her betrothed home. They would consummate the marriage, but they would usually not see each other in this in-between time. So at the point of betrothal, these families essentially began to become linked. When she moved to the home, they were totally linked. And it's important to see that if someone in the extended family did something honorable and it was held in high esteem by the community, every single person in that family was honored or viewed as if this is something they did themselves. If someone did something stupid, the entire family was affected. Thank God we don't have that anymore, right? Joseph was what the Bible calls a tectone, which is a manual laborer who would have worked with his hands. Most signs indicate he was from Bethlehem, which was a long walk, but a pretty easy walk to Jerusalem, which is the holiest place on earth for the Jewish people of that day and even to this day. So Joseph was a person who had proximity to very holy places, and it appears by evidence in the Gospels he was profoundly shaped by his religion. Stories are about him being obedient to rituals. He participated in the festivals, presented his child in the temple at the right time, participated in pilgrimages to get there. Later in the life, when he was in Nazareth, Nazareth was known to be an ultra-religious community. Nazareth means netzer, the remnant, the faithful branch, the devout people. The lesson today says he was righteous, which meant he was focused on applying the biblical law in his daily life. He lived intentionally, and the sense is he was faithful. Faithful. You all with me still? Giving you a boatload here at one point, but at some point, though, you have to see that arrangements would have been made between Joseph's family and Mary's family. A gift would have been given by Joseph's father to Mary's parents. Mary's dad obviously accepted that gift and promised his daughter in some sort of ceremony, and they entered into a set-apart time. And during this set-apart time, Joseph learns that Mary is pregnant, and he knows he's not the father. So we can project onto Joseph all of our 21st century emotions of things how we would feel: angry, disappointed, betrayed, full of rage, bitterness, who knows. But the clear thing you have to see is he clearly does not believe her story at first on how she got pregnant. Clearly, he does not believe her at first. And what's also clear is that by biblical law, Mary was guilty of a capital offense. Guilty of a capital offense. To be pregnant by anyone other than Joseph, she and the child she was carrying by biblical law should have been put to death, if this becomes public. It's just the way the world was. It's not the way our world is, but it's the way the world was in that time. And so Joseph starts to think about this. Use the image of a revolving door where it just keeps going round and round. He's pondering all this in his head. What should I do? He's pondering his options. He's troubled. And he finally comes to the conclusion, I'll back away. I'll call this off. I'll let the family keep the gifts, but he says ultimately I am not going to link my family and their honor with her family, but I'll not accuse her publicly. I'll just let them off to live their own life, but I will no longer be a part of this. And I think what you need to see is Joseph is not being a biblical literalist at all. He's known what the Bible says, but in this moment what he does is says, I do not want to follow what's in the biblical law of exposing her and putting her to death. What he's doing is reinterpreting it and saying, I want to just extend mercy. I want to extend mercy and let mercy reign in this case. And that decision kept her alive. That decision ultimately kept her unborn child alive. And for that, I think we can say thanks be to God. Joseph goes to sleep and he goes to sleep, and God gets further involved in his life. He speaks to him in a dream. He sends the angel Gabriel to him. And when I think of angels, I think of God's diplomats. Think about a diplomat. A diplomat is sent on a mission, and their mission is to broker relationships, build connections, change minds, change behavior, but it's ultimately about building goodwill. And the diplomats that God sends are always to build up his people. So Gabriel, the diplomat, speaks to Joseph, hey, hang in there. You don't fully understand it, but there's more to the story, is what he says. This child is a divine gift for the world. Do not be afraid. You take Mary as your wife, as it had been laid out at the beginning. And you yourself, Joseph, you will name the child Jesus. But realize, in naming the child, when you name something, you ultimately are claiming that child as your own, and that's what Joseph does. When he awoke, what it says is he was obedient to the dream. He was obedient. It is the first act of discipleship in the Gospel of Matthew is Joseph. He was obedient to God's will. People who work with clay, I don't know how many people in the room have done pottery in your life. I'm always fascinated by people who can do it and do it well, but people who work with clay, they know that one of the keys is to make sure the clay is moist. Because when it's moist, it's receptive, it can be shaped, it can be adapted, it can be changed into something beautiful. If it isn't moist, you realize there's not much you can do. It's just almost pointless. The key is it has to be moist. As I look at Joseph, to me, he ultimately, his story, he is like moist clay. He's open to God's involvement in his life. He proves to be willing to listen and take direction. He proves to be someone who is willing to be redirected and have his mind changed. He ultimately proves to be someone who trusts that God is in charge, not him. And he is someone who really ultimately stepped out of his comfort zone and showed some courage. He continued to have dreams, continued to have other dreams, and he listened to those. One was to get out of Bethlehem because there was a genocide about to happen. And then he listened to another dream later which says, you can go back because it's safe now. I'm sure he ended up in Nazareth. I'm sure the rest of his life he worked as a tectone. But I'm sure that at least for a number of years, his sidekick would have been this young man named Jesus. Because that's what you did in the day. You taught your child the trade. And I imagine Jesus, the first part of his life, was surrounded by an earthly father who was devout, who was open to the Spirit leading him, but who ultimately tried to be obedient to God. It's not just an ancient story, it's for all of us. Because I believe God speaks to us all the time. I believe God is trying to get through to us through his own diplomats, which could be some of the people in this room, it could be others. But God is always calling us to listen and pay attention to new possibilities. Our question will always be, is our clay moist? Is our spirit moist? Are we open to allowing God to shape and reshape and change our life? Amen.